Well, let me introduce the events of tonight. But first of all, welcome to our 7th Zoom presentation, always against a backdrop of educate, inspire, and engage. We're looking at the people on the line. Once again, we love the fact that members of council are participating in this exercise. We appreciate their presence. Before I introduce our speaker, I'd like to do a land acknowledgement. And actually, I'd like to use the land acknowledgement council's now using on Monday nights. I thought it was excellent, so I'm using that one. We will begin by acknowledging that the land on which we gather is the traditional territory of the Three Fires Confederacy of First Nations, comprising the Ojibwe, the Ottawa, and the Pitta-Matanis peoples, and of the Huron, Wendat, and Wyandot peoples. We recognize the land as an expression of gratitude to those whose traditional territory we reside on, and a way of honoring the Indigenous people who have been living and thriving on this land since time immemorial. We value the significant historical and contemporary contributions of local and regional First Nations and all of the original peoples of Turtle Island. So our topic tonight is placemaking, a topic that probably a lot of you are not that familiar with. It's a multifaceted approach to planning, design, and management of public spaces. And that's what we have in Amherstburg. And it done properly, it will capitalize on all of Amherstburg's existing assets, its potential, and importantly, inspiration of all our residents. Now, our speaker tonight will explain what I mean by all of that and how it can help make Amherstburg even better. So let me introduce our speaker tonight. First of all, I would like to thank the University of Windsor Law Center for Cities. They're one of our advisors at Thrive, specifically Annika Smith. And we'd like to welcome Jim Tischler, a Michigan sustainable planning expert who is a visiting fellow at the University of Windsor Law School. Jim presently serves as the development director for the state of Michigan Land Bank Authority. Jim also previously served as the state of Michigan's Community Development Policy Director, leading formation and design of the State of Michigan Placemaking Initiative. He has 34 years of experience in the fields of urban planning, real estate, community economic development, and redevelopment, working for public organizations and consulting with private sector firms. Jim holds a master's of urban planning, a degree from Wayne State University across the border, and is a graduate of the University of Oklahoma Economic Development Institute. We are delighted that Jim will share us his vast planning and land management expertise. He's going to be doing that with the University of Windsor students, and we're delighted he's going to do that with us tonight. Jim, welcome to Amherstburg virtually. When you get settled and the border gets open, we know you'll be spending time on campus, and we hope you can get down to see us. We're only about 30 kilometers, or in your lingo, 18 miles from Windsor, or the campus, so we'd love to see you. So on that note, I'd like to turn it over to our speaker tonight, Jim Tischler.
All right, great. Thank you, Richard, and good evening to you all. Appreciate that introduction. I am coming to you electronically tonight from my home in Lansing, Michigan, which is in the center of the Lower Peninsula and is the ancestral home of the Sauk, Mississauga, Ottawa, Anishinaabeg, and Peoria nations, in respect to how you all address meetings and openings now. It's a real pleasure to have a chance to, as one of my soccer coaches who was teaching me how to coach one time told me, to give a chance to present to you all information which might help put structure to what you are all doing in this wonderful placemaking initiative work that you have going in Amherstburg. I'm aware through talking to Richard and the team that you have 9 initiatives going, and that they are, while I can't identify them specifically at the moment, that they are running across a larger range of activities, both physical, social, and economic within the community. What I'm going to try to do tonight is to weave those together and give you a sense of what is known out there as the science and the practice of what you might know as your sense of place. So in a series of about 25, 30 slides, and many of them are going to be images, my hope is that you get that sense, get that understanding of what the technical science might be behind what your endeavor is starting to come out of the gate with. Okay, we'll start. I think I'm going to start if I can get this presentation going. There we go. Okay. So we'll set a baseline by talking about what we mean by certain terms. Now, place, if you were to open the dictionary, would give you this definition, which is very generic and specifically is an area with a definite or sometimes indefinite boundary or boundaries. It's a portion of space. We're not talking about that tonight, and you are not engaged in that as Thrive Amherstburg, where in the literature and the science, what I see you being engaged in is in the focus of quality place. Quality place, which has a technical definition, is a building, location, structure, or space that possesses a strong sense of place. And we'll get into what that means and what your emotional sense of place is in a few slides here. So if we focus, the first part of this presentation, we'll talk about what place is and what that means to people and how people connect to place. And then we'll move into placemaking, which is the active process of doing what your initiative is starting to try, which is to create or maintain or preserve quality places where people want to live, work, play, and learn. And that is become now the contemporary definition of what placemaking is. And you can add that last phrase back to quality place, meaning that strong sense of place is tied to a desire and intent and interest in wanting to be, or you can live, work, play, and learn. Okay, so as I alluded to, there's going to be a number of images in this presentation, and I'm hoping that this is going to transition fairly well for you, so you can see this. This is a very important exercise I want to take you through just to get you all started. What I'm going to ask you to do is I'm going to ask you to watch these slides as I work through them and I describe them. And I'm going to ask you, as you watch them, to be have perspective, be sensitive to what you're perceiving, not just what comes in information, but how you are perceiving it. Okay, so we're going to start with this image, even though this is a image from a transportation corridor in a Michigan community, if you think or you know that this looks pretty close to a street corridor in Amherstburg, you can put your thumb up to say, yes, you've seen that in your town. And I suspect everybody's got their thumb raised, right? Okay, all right. Let's describe what you're seeing here. It's a traditional or a contemporary street system, street that has auto orientation to it, few restrictions on ingress, egress, a large amount of impervious paved surface. I see somebody actually did their thumb up. I appreciate that. And very little pedestrian orientation. And if you look at the activity, the uses that are adjacent to the street, they're all single use activities. Okay. So if you think that, or that makes sense that you see that in your community, now let's make assumptions or make presumption and assessments of if we were to make improvements. I'm hoping this slide will progress. There we go. Okay. So what is an opportunity or activity typical of governments? Often they engage in what's known as streetscaping, adding street lights and landscaping. All right. But let's look more closely at this. In reality, this street has become now pedestrian oriented. There's a sidewalk. There's on-street parking. There's a center turn lane, which is colorized or brick, which shows cars where and how to go. And overall, this corridor, this combination of public and private space is better defined. And you have a better sense of where to go, what to do, how to do it in this area. Okay. But let's advance the slide now and assume another condition. Okay. You can laugh if you want. Trees do not go to 10-inch centers overnight. But let's just imagine that for the moment here. If this street were to have this treatment in time, not just the street lights and the landscaping, all right, but the advantage now of further definition of the space and also the ability to start to address some climate response activities, shading, the ability to reduce temperature in that corridor and the like. So that's another improvement to be made. Keep your sense of what you're watching here going. In this next advancement of investment in this place, in this location, a traffic circle, a rotary you might call it, has been added with further landscaping in the center. What's the effect of that? Slowing traffic, making this area more pedestrian friendly, not just for walking or cycling or other active transportation areas, but just actually being in. It has more attractiveness to people. So those have been typical activities at governmental level that I presume has happened in Amherstburg as well as other communities in Ontario for that matter. But the real kicker is this next improvement, all right, which is how you feel. I'm asking you to give us or think about what your sensation is now in this setting. If you were in this setting, okay, most people usually respond to say that they feel the sense of place. Right? And there's a science behind that. It's not just that it's 2- and 3-story mixed use buildings. It's not just that it's portions of sidewalk sheltered from sun and rain. Those are important. It's because your personal sense of framing, your sense of place is addressed in a positive sense. And you have an emotional reaction to that. What's that emotional reaction? Only you can describe what that emotional reaction is. But there is an emotional reaction, and that is in effect defining what your sense of place is. So at community scale, at street and block or neighborhood scale, if we were to imagine that a municipality, be it Amherstburg or Windsor or any other municipality, were to engage in a construct, a planning approach to make places move towards conditions like this, not this exact condition, but conditions like this, that is what placemaking is about. And its objective is to embrace and enhance your sense of place. Because the research shows very clearly that in good place locations, the greater exchange of social and economic conditions yields greater prosperity for those places and for those communities. Now, we're going to cover a couple more montages later in this presentation. So you can get that sense again and see what it is. But what I want to do now is dive deeper into why this is the case, okay? There is actually a science behind place and a science behind placemaking, right? It's not well known because the science is cross-discipline. As I've chatted with faculty members over at Center for Cities and in here at Michigan State University and such, we have been able to engage cross-disciplinary teams to actually evaluate this and go into the literature and bring out some of this material. And you're seeing a compilation in one slide of the baseline summary of what that all means. And it's a simple formula. The key components are form and activity. And what I mean by that is that where a place, be it a street corridor, or be it a downtown, or a neighborhood district area, or a general neighborhood, where there is good form meaning the definition of building structures and monuments or other built form items, framing good space, that generally and most often yields good social activity, which generates a positive psychological or emotional response of people. That's your sense of place. And by virtue of that, the exchange of social and economic activity, I've used that phrase again, I'll continue to use it, this exchange, be it dollar exchange, be it communication exchange, be it happiness exchange, be it people exchange, whatever it may be. That prosperity is what generates value across all those topics, subjects, and across all those realms. And that is what the science is very clear about. Good form generates good activity, which yields psychological response to want to stay or engage and exchange. And that mixing of exchanging, engaging is what's driving prosperity, however you want to describe it: social, economic, physiological prosperity, meaning health benefits, and even ecological prosperity, meaning benefit to humans and to the natural environment. This is the first key: form, activity, and the relationship between form and activity. Here's an analogy that you can think of. It might work for you outside of a simple graphic from the last slide. If you can imagine that you were in a theater listening to a concert. If you're not a music person, maybe you want to go and watch a play. You can choose either analogy. The form is the stage and the framing of the space for within which the activity is the concert or it's the play. And you have usually an emotional reaction when it's good and when it's good. And if you have that emotional reaction, it manifests itself, whether it's economic, meaning the play or the concert makes money, okay, or it's social, meaning you have exchange with your fellow patrons in the space, in this place to exchange. Now, everybody has a unique perspective. But together, if we're all in that audience, we have a collective emotional response which generates eventual prosperity, because the form is good and it appropriately frames the activity, which is good as well. So now let's explore a little more about this relationship between form and activity, because some of you may sense it, but you may not have had really any technical explanation of what this means. I've given you a summary, but I'm going to give you a little bit of detail now. Again, form means mass, the facades of buildings, or the dimensions of structure, and the space between them, okay, where humans and critters and other activities occur. That is this relationship that I'm trying to get you to understand as place. That's what it's about: relationships and ratios of mass and space at street or block or neighborhood or community scale. And that good form aligns with a regional place location. We'll cover a topic called the transect shortly, where the semi-private or the private space meets the public space. That is defined, that's the demarcation line between as the frame of space. So I've been showing you perhaps some downtown or core district, small core district area spaces. The similar framing occurs out in residential neighborhoods. Where is the demarcation line? It's on the inside of the sidewalk in this street image, which is the boundary between private space and public space, and that's the frame. Okay. However, the building facades of these nice residential units contribute to the framing of place, because they give you or me, if we were walking or even driving down the street, a positive framing, a positive supporting sense that we're in a good place. Good form contains natural features at appropriate to regional scale. You would see this type of treatment in most corridors and downtown or core district areas, which provide shade, provide climate response benefit, provide other benefits to citizens. But in other places in region, it's at a different scale. This could be a park that is just down the block from that street, or it could be a natural space which is 2 to 3 kilometers out of town. Either way, scale is important in the measurement and the design and structure of form and framing of space. You already knew this too, but it benefits to say directly, nature is a place with form. There's no built form here, but it's natural form. There is a natural system construct to form and activity. And back to, you sense that when you go out to nice places, whether it's the Sleeping Bear Dunes here in Michigan, or whether it's Point Pelee, or other locations that you have, which are favorite to you to go and be with nature. So natural places and human activity, they mix in this location of rural space for rural form. A good example is what you see in this slide here. You see enough human activity, but you do not see a lot of built form because ag land, rural spaces are not build out spaces. They are growing spaces for what sustains us as humans. You can advance the slide, Corey. So where there's good form, there's the natural tendency to generate activity because people are attracted because of their sense of place framing to those activities. You can advance the slide. And that activity can be across the board. It could be a social activity. It could be impromptu. It could be a program social event like what you see here. Advance the slide. It could be go ahead, yep. It could be a leisure activity. And as you see these slides, pay attention to the framing in the background because it could be a sport activity. All these activities are taking place within an envelope of form, which has good sense, good framing, and people are comfortable there, and people want to be there to watch these activities. You can advance the slide. Or it could be spontaneous activity. Now, in this case, the added bonus is that this municipality purchased and put out in this park space tables and chairs. They're there every day. There's 300 chairs and there's 55 tables, don't know the number. And they are there for people to use. And what people do is they get those tables and chairs and they go out and they engage, and they have at lunchtime, at late morning, afternoon, even early evenings. And when they're done, they actually put the chairs and tables back and it becomes an open space overnight. And I'd like to report that in the 5 years that I was observing this, the only times that there were missing chairs or tables was because they were broken and had to be replaced. That was it. So spontaneous activity can generate, but it generates because the setting is ready for it to generate spontaneously. If this was a parking lot in a large shopping center, I want you to imagine whether spontaneous activity like this would occur. Right? And it's not because we don't like large shopping areas. It's the framing of form and how it attracts or it affects activity. You can advance the slide. Where any place exists where people gather, you can go ahead and advance it. Naturally and sustainably, activity follows, is not far behind. You could advance it one more time. Your positive emotional response is and leads to your sense of place. You can advance it again. So I've said this a few times, and I'm going to continue saying it until you've got it drilled into your minds. This connection of people to place flows like this. Go ahead. This is an interactive slide, Corey. Good form, click it again. Naturally sustains activity, click it again. Which yields positive emotion, click again. And economic prosperity. That's the formula of how it works. In the science, found in the literature, and likely coming to life as you are starting to engage one or any of your 9 activities in Thrive Amherstburg. You can advance the slide. So how is place, if we understand what it means now, we've seen various settings of place. Next comes how it's organized. Well, it literally organizes across regions. A continuum. Some of you may have heard this. I'll suspect many of you have not. There is what's called a transect. It is a borrowing out of the natural science literature brought into the human anthropological and sociological literature, which is that humans live in a transect structure similar to critters in nature. And it's comprised of 6 place types. It consists of ranging from natural to fully human environments. And they are generally consistent whether you are in Canada, United States, Mexico, Western Europe, Eastern Europe, any place on the planet. However, there are unique elements that distinguish the Southwest Ontario from Northwest Lower Michigan or any other region that you have. So keep in mind that the basics, the fundamentals are usually consistent, with unique aspects which are unique to those regions which distinguish them. Most importantly, to be good form, it has to be correct for the region location. So we're going to go through these place types so you understand what they are, so you can get a sense of how it relates to what you're doing with your work in Amherstburg. And go ahead and move the slide. I apologize. It's a little fuzzy on the lower left side of that because that's a blow up. This whole slide is a large blow up of a smaller slide I had earlier. But in these series of slides, you're going to see the place location, but in the upper left is the attempt that we made back when we were doing this placemaking initiative to summarize all the literature relative to sense of place, whether it's be social, economic, or psychological. So in natural places, which is where critters live, okay, and we go to recharge, there is, as you might expect, fairly low social or economic sense generation of place that's there because they are not human locations. They are locations for critters, but there is a high generation of psychological sense that arrives from people being in these places because natural places stimulate humans consistently. You can advance the slide. The next place type is rural place. Rural place is the growing land. It's similar to the natural, but to less extent. There's a high sense of psychological intensity because people understand that's where growing places are. A little bit more economic activity because of agricultural work, not so much social activity in rural spaces. Now, I want to make sure I distinguish between rural place and rural spaces and small towns. Some people say that their small town is rural place. And what I'm going to say is not so much. It's the rural place is the growing land. The small towns are really small urban neighborhoods, small urban settlements, which exist within the context of rural place or rural space. Next slide, please. Suburban place, which had its advent in the mid or early 20th century, has become a transition zone between rural and urban, and it has a larger level of emotional response across the realms, social, economic, and psychological, in large part because many people live in suburban locations and they habituate many activities in those locations as well. You can advance the slide. The predominant human settlement place type still remains what we would call traditional or neighborhood place. You have these neighborhoods in Amherstburg. Other communities in Southwest Ontario have these neighborhoods as well. You know them, you see them, you probably live in them. There is, as you can see, a higher level of both psychological and higher levels of economic and social activity, prosperity that occur in those regions as well. Next slide. The downtown of Amherstburg is a downtown place. Relative to other neighborhoods in Amherstburg, it has perhaps the highest intensity levels across the realms, both psychological as well as economic and social. And the reason for that is because that's where the greatest exchange is happening most of the time, meaning exchange of people, of ideas, of dollars, of activity. It's going and that's going. And that's what's driving that go. And it's a ubiquitous that happens in just about every other downtown or neighborhood center, by the way. In larger cities, this would be a neighborhood center as opposed to the downtown. If you move the slide. And every region has its own downtown, or what we would call the core. In your region, the urban core is the core of Windsor. Remember, we're thinking at regional scale now. Across the river in Southeast Michigan, that urban core would be downtown Detroit. Here in Lansing, it would be downtown Lansing for the Lansing region. So every region has a core downtown, and that has, based on the research and the literature, has the highest level of intensity in terms of psychological, economic, and social exchange going on between people. Okay, and that, again, that's consistent across every region, either in every continent, going across the globe. You can move the slide. Now what we're doing is I want to show you what these look like brought all together, because the Windsor-Essex region looks similar, not exact, but probably looks similar to what you're seeing here. You have an assemblage of all of these place types. It's not all concentric circles. It's not all uniform. You have various amoebic frame forms of these places and spaces, but all of these place types exist within your region, and all these place types have an appropriate form, and that appropriate form frames activity, social, economic, physiological, ecological activity. And when it's good and it's appropriate to the place location, that's what's make those places within your region prosperous. And that is the making of good place. So we've been through a little bit of this now of talking about place and what that means and how it's defined and where it's located. Now I want to talk to you about placemaking. Okay. Now in the literature, in the research we did, there are 4 different types of placemaking. Within a large universe of standard placemaking are 3 focused sub-elements, or not sub-elements, focused placemaking areas. And they are strategic placemaking, creative placemaking, and tactical placemaking. In this slide, what I'm showing you here is that there are linkages between these focused placemaking areas. For example, between strategic and creative placemaking, form has a very strong link. Between strategic and tactical placemaking, use and function has a link. Between creative and tactical placemaking is a higher level of initiative for social opportunity. Where is the appropriate target? As you might expect, right in the center, if you can get it, where you've got this benefit of mixing across the various targeted placemaking activities, which has benefit for all audiences and all activities. So now we're going to talk in the next slides briefly about what those types of placemaking areas are. So in standard or just general placemaking, projects and activities, you're going to see this here. We're talking about the types of projects and type of activities. A project is a defined entity, defined endeavor, which is going to have a specific accomplishment. An activity is a general or a regular, it might be ongoing endeavor or endeavors which sustain over time. So in standard placemaking, these might be familiar to you because government engages this often. Downtown street and facade improvements, neighborhood-based projects such as building rehabs, infill or upfill of projects, park improvements. Activities in standard placemaking would be public or social events that occur within the existing public places. I suspect, as I mentioned this, you're familiar because you are probably doing this, both as Thrive Amherstburg and as the municipality as well on a regular or even an annual basis. Now, strategic placemaking is more specifically tied to talent retention and talent attraction. It follows this philosophy, and which is in the research as well, which is this troika between business, talent, and place. What used to be in old economy, a direct relationship between business and talent, in other words, talent and business were working with each other. Place is the third element, which is now part of that troika. And the literature and is found that business wants talent, but talent now wants to be in place. And places need business investment to thrive as well. So what used to be a 2-way relationship is really now a 3-way circular relationship that occurs, which is why placemaking as an economic development strategy is so critically important. And that projects that would be undertaken in strategic placemaking would be tied to economic or social or strategic planning initiatives or endeavors of a municipality or a region or an institution or an organization. So projects which might be identified in strategic realm might be a targeted mixed-use development in key centers or nodes, or in larger communities, it might be investments in public or rapid transit lines, and doing that in combination with the other investments incented or otherwise by the government, which is founded in those plans. And it would not necessarily just be local government. It could have higher levels of government too. In your case, might be provincial investments or even federal investments, which leverage up and down the chain. Activities would involve frequent cyclical events that are directly targeted to talented workers for retention and attraction purposes. And in addition, arts, culture, and other entertainment activities. The whole idea is that being attractive to bring talent into the region, into the place, to provide social economic prosperity. Next slide, please. Creative placemaking has a similar targeted approach, but it's designed to revolve around the arts and culture, whether it be it music, be it theater productions. Just up the street, the Windsor International Film Festival is an absolute example of creative placemaking, okay? Where these activities, these arts and culture activities, take place in the framework of the form and activity space we've been talking about. And because they happen within that realm of form, or within that frame of form, it actually embraces and sustains and enhances the activity that goes on. It doesn't have to be ongoing. It could be new things doing. New ideas that can be done impromptu, entertainment, culture, chalk art, outdoor concerts, even more permanent sculpture programs in parks. Those all fall within the realm of creative placemaking. Next slide, please. Tactical placemaking is, in a summary, you do it, low cost, get it going, see what the results are. It emanates from two landmark research projects which led to books, one called Tactical Urbanism and another called Lighter, Quicker, Cheaper. If you've heard of the Project for Public Spaces, they are the proponents of Lighter, Quicker, Cheaper. And the New Urbanists through the Street Plan Collaborative are focused on tactical urbanism. And you've probably, if not in Amherstburg or in adjacent communities, you've probably seen what their projects have been. If you want to move the slide. The pop-up market was originally a tactical urbanism idea, which came to life in the early 2000s and is fairly common now across many cities in North America and across the globe. This example, by the way, was taken in Ionia, Michigan. And what you should note here is not just that it's the pop-up space for retail, but that the downtown organization there, if you see that those, what appears at first glance to be buildings, so it's really the painted backs of the buildings. This is not on the street. This is in the alley that's behind the main street in Ionia. That's actually being used as the pop-up market. Next slide. In New York City and a few other large cities, they utilize, or they have modified trash dumpsters to become what are called parklet testing operations. These get moved around from place to place, and they stay there for a period of time, and they're used as tests. They're to test to see whether the public likes these spaces for recreation or for hanging out. And if not, if so, then it goes to a more formal design and development. And if not, it gets taken to a location for testing. It's another example of tactical urbanism. Next slide, please. And when those really, really temporary activities prove successful, they might be expanded. These are more examples of tactical urbanism, where for a day or for a weekend or for a week, that these on-street spaces are used for other activities, not only for the enjoyment of the participants and the communities and neighborhoods, but also for testing to see whether, in fact, this might be done on a long-term basis. And interestingly enough, when you look at these types of activities economically, more often than not, what's found is that the economic return of converting a parking space to a non-parking use, like what you see here, actually provides more revenue to adjacent businesses than if it was a parking space. Next slide, please. All right, so this is a busy slide. In this summary, what I'm trying to show you is these types of placemaking, be it standard, strategic, creative, or tactical. Are they tied to plans? That's the second column. This is when you get copies of this presentation, you can look at this more closely, but let's go through it. Standard placemaking projects are not necessarily tied to municipal plans, meaning public plans, official plans, development plans of the municipality. Strategic placemaking, they're usually tied to regional or even, in your case, provincial, certainly local plans, because they're designed to have a definitive social economic return benefit. Creative placemaking can, but not necessarily, and tacticals are probably not. If we look at targeted locations or timeframes or activities, they range based upon the type of activity you're engaged. I won't go into detail there. On the far right is whether there's public subsidy necessary for these types of projects. They may be necessary for standard placemaking. For strategic, they for sure are likely necessary. For creative, possibly, and because of the impromptu-ness of tactical placemaking, not too likely. Next slide. And it's coming. Here we go. So you might be asking yourself, okay, Jim, we've been talking about all these different types of placemaking. How and what do we do to apply them across the 9 initiatives of Thrive Amherstburg? Well, this is not the complete decision tree for you, Richard and team and group, but what I'm giving you here is a suggestion about how you might undertake a decision process to select the proper type of placemaking dependent upon what your objectives are. So let's walk through this slide. It's in sequence. First is under that initiative, one of your 9 initiatives, is there a need or is there a desire to have for it to be a project or activity, whatever the item that you're discussing is. Next, where is it on the transect? In other words, in what place type? Is it in your downtown? Is it on a corridor? Is it in a neighborhood? Those are different place types, regional setting. Next, well, a subset of that, is it a targeted activity? In other words, it's targeted center node or corridor. Next, what scale of significance will it have? Is this intended to be a block impact or neighborhood impact or community impact? Probably not regional impact, but that's there in the decision tree so you can understand that. Next, what realm does this occur? Is this within public space or is it in private space that is available for use of the public, or is it both? Next, what is the purpose that this activity or project is designed to achieve? And finally, what's the design focus? What is the form element, whether it's existing or needing to be constructed or developed related to the activity? If you can go through and answer each of these items, the resolution of those answers is going to help you select what is the appropriate type of placemaking activity that you will use, whether it's standard, strategic, creative, or tactical. Right? So in answer to the question, which hasn't been asked, which is, where did all this come from, Jim? It came out of a lot of research that was done by myself and a number of other agencies and governmental organizations and private and public entities cross-sector about 8 to 10 years ago. What we found when we got the charge from the governor of Michigan to help communities make better places, what we found was that there was really no consistent structure to all the knowledge and practice out there in the literature. We literally had to construct a curriculum. And what you're seeing here is a graphic representation of what that curriculum looks like. Now it's a ladder graphic and it's built in 6 modules, as you can see on this slide here, starting with module 1, going up through module 6. Tonight, what you've had here is a summary of the best of out of the first module. People, how they connect the places, and what is placemaking. And there are further details, as you can see in this graphic, that would follow in this curriculum that was organized and designed and constructed and taught, related to development patterns, what is not placemaking, our initiative, leadership, and such. I'm not going to go into what all those elements are, just to show you is that what you've heard tonight is the best of out of module 1. Module 2 in the curriculum was an assembly across 16 different areas of practice and research and understanding, showing or evaluating what the economic benefit impact of place and placemaking was relative to other forms of economic development. And there's a wide range of school of thought with economic development. And what the research shows, flat out, frank and direct, is that place-based economic development is most productive, period, because it links those 3 aspects: business, talent, and place, because that's the way cities operate and regions operate and nations operate in today's economy. Third module is what are the components of place? You've got a little bit of it tonight, but in a larger detail, we break it down into the elements of form at block, street, a neighborhood, community, regional basis. In the 4th module is or in the fourth section of the curriculum, is how communities could, or why we would say, we recommend should consider how to actually plan for and regulate for good place and placemaking. And it all revolves around a concept which is called form planning and form regulation, form coding, which is quite different than what many communities do today. They are focused on use-based planning and use-based regulation, AKA zoning. Module 5 is how does this get done in the community? And in a brief one-word response, I will give to you, charrette. In other words, the government cannot cause or order this to happen. The individuals cannot do it on themselves. It's only through the involvement and the engagement of the entire community and subsets thereof that this can become owned by everybody and executed by everybody with support by everybody. And the last module is a presentation and discussion of what are the technical, tactical, and procedural tools that are available once a person, once an organization, once a community, once a region understands and has advanced and worked through and understanding what all this is about, to put it to practice to actually make these places come to life and become sustainable and beneficial for all. And that's what yields prosperity and talent attraction. So, in reminder, these key components of placemaking: good form, number 1, leads to 2, good activity. That leads to 3, a positive emotional response in people, which when felt in common yields 4, a strong sense of place. And when that strong sense of place exists, then exchange begins to occur at higher and higher levels, which leads to economic and social prosperity. Next slide, please. I'm going to bring you now back to close with another montage. Different what you saw earlier, but once again, I want you to think in your perspective, almost third-person perspective, observe your emotional response as we walk through these slides. This street, I suspect, could be any street in Amherstburg. Okay? All right. And it functions. But if we start to look at it from changing form, be it pedestrian improvements, next slide, to bringing in green space, green development, both for amenity and for climate response, that works. It's good. But the full package comes together is when we actually frame it with good form. Go ahead and last slide. Again, the research and literature shows that these types of framings of space and place is what yields the best social and economic return for communities. And that's the end of this presentation. This is the last slide. So if you click it, it'll go black as well. And I'm done for the moment. I'm ready to take any questions or comments that you might have. I'll turn it back to you, Richard.
Okay, Jim, excellent. As I said, I don't think I came across the concept of placemaking not that long ago, and I've kind of fancy myself as knowing a lot of stuff about this, but good work, and I learned more today. I really appreciated the fact that you know your examples were markets, communities like Amherstburg, so it seems pretty relevant. You know, it's tough not to like this. So how do you you know, not everyone wants change like this. How do you, but you've got all the science that supports that this makes sense. How do you sell people on investing in placemaking like this?
Well, I'm going to unpack your question in at least 2 different responses, okay? In a general basis, okay? I think as what we did, which was showing people the numbers, okay? That showing people the results of a litany of studies and analyses across the United States, across the world, which showed that economic and social productivity increased by taking these types of measures, okay? The second part generally is that is engaging people in larger groups. In other words, I used that phrase shredding earlier. not a charrette event itself, but utilizing the skills, which is gathering a group of people and letting them come to consensus. Not everybody's going to agree that that is the exact way we're going to go, but most people will agree in a group that if there's a consensus and it can address what, at least part of what their concerns are, then they're generally going to go along with it. Okay. And so the idea of not, I said this earlier, of the government not telling people this is what we should do or how we should do it, but facilitating through engagement of the populace and reach out to populations which may not necessarily be interested or willing to come to the table because they historically have not been allowed to come to the table. Getting those groups into discussions and getting their consensus has almost always, in my experience, generated positive forward advancement of consensus towards these types of goals. Okay. Now, back to how do you pay for stuff like this? Well, I'll use the same response, which is that the financial and research analysis have shown, particularly in concepts such as target market analysis, I talked about that in another session earlier in another program today and such, which is that the real estate market, once they come to understand that there is value, a higher margin of value in place or premiums in place locations, in development place locations, and it's shown to them financially, the result is the market moves and it begins to make those investments. And that example, there are many out there, even locally in your region. Just go right up to 401 and see what's transpired up that way. But it's, again, that's ubiquitous across so many areas as well. And not just Toronto. I'm talking about places like London, like Kitchener, all of those types of places. So it's this combination of showing the numbers and providing opportunity for everybody to have a say, which more often than not is actually going to advance towards a better placemaking format.
Okay, I've got other questions, but I'd really like to throw it through the floor. And Corey, if there's, I don't always read the questions that pop up. Have you got anything for us?
Yeah.
Anyone want to put up their hands?
So if anybody wants to just put up your hand, go ahead in Zoom and we'll come to you. And then, or if you just want to add your question to the chat, I can read them out as well. So we've got Lisa Porter's hand up. So we'll go to Lisa first.
Hi, Jim. Great talk. So I guess I have two questions. I'm not sure how well worded these are going to be. But so, I mean, in part, Annika and Centers for Cities is one of our advisors. And so, you know, while you were talking, the researcher in me really liked the sort of tactical urbanism approach and collecting data and metrics. And I was wondering, you know, outside of people who do research directed at this, is there any kind of effort to, you know, organize the metrics that different cities are collecting on changes that they're making, and to advise on the metrics that are most informative, et cetera?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think of a couple of responses for you. When we were first getting into this 8-9 years ago, if some of you might remember LEAD ND, if that rings a bell with anybody, LEAD for Neighborhood Development, and then trying to think of the other one, State of Place. These were metric systems that were developed at university level or at practitioner in combination with university level, and they were brought on at various stages and times. In follow up to this session, I can talk to you or anybody else more about that. What those metric systems or analytical systems were intended to try to provide an econometric measure of what would happen if investments at appropriate mass intensity scale were made, or you had enough of the amenities of good places in that block, in that corridor, in that community and such. There's another one that escapes my mind right now, which actually had a place score that existed. We utilized that in our state agency programming decision tree process for a few years as well. What's important to keep in mind, though, is that these metric systems, they are morphing and changing as urbanism, as city building is changing as well, because we're getting better and better understanding of this interconnectivity between elements of the built environment and human activity as time progresses. So those are some examples of systems that have been used in the past, and they will continue to advance and morph into the future as to go. One other quick point I'll share with you, and I can share this with Richard and team as well. We documented everything we did. Some of Richard's team has gotten access to the Placemaking Guidebook, which is a large volume, 500 pages plus, which lays out all of the structure and organization that I've summarized tonight. And that is available free of charge electronically. And I can give you that link later on, so you can actually get a little better, or to whatever level you all want to get in depth-wise into these chapters or into these areas of placemaking. My only caution is that it's a massive size megabyte file. So you've got to have a lot of time on your download so you can get access to that document. Anyway, so those are two answers I have for you to start. And of course, as I mentioned to Richard and the team through the center, be willing to be of advice and counsel to your initiative as time progresses.
Yeah, that's great. It almost seems like there could be taking that data and using sort of engineering modeling or something like that, right? Where you could say, let's plug in data from Amherstburg and see what would be the best options based on the data that's out there, these kinds of things. Is there anyone doing that?
Yes, I'm just trying to think of who I could give you, or identify specifically tonight, and nobody comes to mind. What I guess I didn't open up by telling you all was I told Richard I got back from 2 weeks camping in the wilderness just on over the weekend, and so I'm still trying to catch my mind back on life in general. So I can give you some examples. I just got to get into my files and get into some more contacts, and I can respond to you.
Okay, I have another one too, but I'll leave it because I see there's others have the chance at either.
Lisa, I do have that 552-page download.
Okay.
Corey,
right.
what else you got?
Yeah, so we've got a question in the chat here from Dylan. Is there a link between strong civic pride and positive movement on creating good places?
Yes, there is. Keep in mind, I'm trying to pull it out of the recesses of my mind. The Knight found, this is thinking back to that curriculum. If you remember that module 2, the economics of place, across all the 16 categories, social was one of those 16 categories. There was a seminal work done by the Knight Foundation. Dr. Catherine Laughlin led that study, and it covered a number of what we'll call the soft sense activities related to place, and found direct correlation between good form, good activity, and strong civic pride. And back to the 552-page book that Richard was talking about. All right, that reference is going to be in that book, and if I get to it before you get to that book reference, I'll share it with him to share back with you guys.
Okay, great. And we've got Sarah with her hand up. Go ahead and unmute.
Thank you. This is a little more for the Thrive membership, I think, in general. Just a small bit of background. We have a beautiful state-of-the-art arena that was built maybe about 12 years ago. And council was presented with a strategic plan for that building. It sits on massive amounts of property, and they didn't approve it for various reasons. And sitting through your presentation tonight, it really hit me that I really feel a mistake that they have kind of put that plan on hold and on a back burner, because it was all about placemaking. All the user groups had been consulted. There had been public feedback, all these kinds of things, and the plan kind of got pushed aside. Do you feel that it's important for these types of plans to be in place? Obviously, it would be a very expensive endeavor, so it's not something that's going to happen next year or even with 5 years, but shouldn't these type of plans be approved and in place so that, our local community can be planning and preparing for placemaking initiatives?
Is that a question for me?
I don't know. I think it's just in general. I think I just want to put the bug in Richard's ear that I think this is something we're going to have to follow up on as Thrive. That it's kind of too bad that this plan has been set aside. Having sat through your presentation, it just kept coming back to me as I sat through all these different things about how to implement placemaking in the community. You know, on the 3 different levels: social, psychological, and environmental, because it did incorporate all of that in that plan and it got set aside. So I think it's more just for Richard to keep the bug in his ear. I think that that's going to be something important that as a group that Thrive, that we follow up on that.
The other thing I'd say is, you know, we got 4 members of council, and, you know, that takes a vote of council to approve that master plan for Libro.
I do have a comment. It's not related to that particular item that Sarah raised or what you responded to, Richard, but it's more generic. And it's tied to communities that look at wanting to, as major capital improvements, doing what I'll call single-use activities. The literature and the practice is replete with them, where there is a decision to have a sporting venue or an entertainment venue or any other sort of public venue, which is designed to accommodate large numbers of people. But the design of the venue is a single purpose. It stands alone. That the research on those types of projects is also very clear, which is over time, they are not successful. They are more they're successful when they have other elements of use that are attached to them or adjacent to them. And you can see that across the river in Detroit. And you can probably see that in other communities in Southwest Ontario, which is where you've got a music event, a music venue or a sports venue or some venue, and it's part of another activity center or multiple activity centers. That is by design, bringing audiences together at all potential times of day, programmed or impromptu, and you're deliberately driving the exchange, social and economic exchange. And those types of developments are almost always successful.
Excellent. Okay. I think we'll go back to Lisa Porter with the final question I have here.
Okay. So I guess this is a very specific question, but one of the things that our youth group is interested in is tree planting. And while our motivation is more climate change and the environment, I'm wondering if there are ways, and it's a very naive question, but there are ways we should be thinking about tree planting that fit into placemaking. You know, like, I mean, obviously strategically with shade, et cetera, but is there a way that it's not going to require too much planning? Because, but, you know, something where we should be looking or resources to think about strategically how we could also use this project to hit on some of the placemaking things.
Yeah, good question. Of course, you've hit on at least a good part of the start of the answer too, which is more green space, more trees in the environment is beneficial for multiple reasons. I think you can fill out the reasons having I said that, but I'm going to add one. And I'm going to focus on this image. I think if you can still see this image on your screen, okay? Even though the building mass in this image is helping you understand the frame of good place through the space, the trees are doing the same thing because they are presenting to you verticality, which gives you that 3-dimensional framing of sense in your mind. So whether it's in a street, this is saying because I don't know what the municipal planning and design and engineering structure is within Amherstburg, but whether it be in if not in a street setting like this, even in the park settings, to the extent that you can establish more formalized corridors in your tree plantings, you're actually framing good space, which could generate then impromptu or better programmed social activity or economic activity.
And I saw that Frank had a question there. Frank, who's has volunteered to be on the Heritage White Paper. So Frank, why don't you fire away?
Thank you, Richard. And thank you, Jim, for your excellent presentation tonight. Uh, Placemaking is very important and needed in Amherstburg. We're kind of a town that is diverse and split because we have old original Amherstburg, and then we have the newer parts and the industrial parts. I think if we could focus on getting action plans and identifying, example, Dalhousie Street from Bellevue up through Old Amherstburg, bringing our churches, our historic churches and our museums together, and streetscaping those areas would go a long way. And I think it would be an easy sell. And also, you have extensive experience in brownstone development, redevelopment. We have the General Chemical property that's 100+ acres that is valuable land, but yet we can't seem to sell it. And my fear is that because it's zoned heavy industrial, we may get an industry there that was worse than General Chemical. That was the worst polluter in Ontario. I had 24 years and I wasn't happy when I lost my job, but I'm happy now that we are not stuck with that pollution, and we're not stuck with the rail cars that were loaded with ammonia gas, chlorine gas, hydrofluoric acid. If we could somehow get a plan together to see that property develop, that would help Amherstburg grow. You know, our history is so diverse. Our town is diverse. We don't utilize our real estate sales professionals because they're developers. And if they buy into this, they'll do the streetscaping and everything else. And as for the Liberal Center, I'll just add that we do not market that property adequately at all. And there's a gold mine there if we did. And I thank you for taking my questions and for your presentation tonight.
Okay, we are wrapping up. I'm just going to say one thing, tactical urbanism, and I think I mentioned this to Jim when we first talked tonight. We did a very successful one on what we call Play Amherstburg on Sunday, where our hypothesis was that there'd be support for safe play for kids on the street. And I think in your chart that you said often it's not the town that pays for that. In this case, it wasn't. It was some Thrive directors that paid for it, and a lot of volunteers that were terrific. And it gave us some really interesting data. And you know, we're thinking of other tactical urbanism tests, so that, you know, it's tough. We're a small town with so much of a tax base. You don't want to just go off and invest a lot of money without some support. So we've got some ideas, and you've given me more tonight. And I know I'm going to be talking to Renee, who's got the file on white paper on Streets Are for People. I've got another idea for her in addition to the research we picked up on Sunday. So Jim, thank you very much for zooming in. And the Center for Cities is lucky to have you. We love that you're in the neighborhood and willing to lend us some help as is possible. So again, thanks for being there. I'm going to wrap up, and you know, I hope, you know, very educational. You know, we wonder what people would click on to watch something called Placemaking, because it might be foreign to them. So we had a good audience, and once again, it will go up on YouTube. We do have upcoming events. Heritage Walk is on August 8th. One of our niches is Heritage, and Meg Reiner from the Marsh Collection will be walking people through downtown to talk about buildings of historic heritage interest. We just still have some seats for that if you want to contact us. Ken Greenberg, who's wrote a really good book called Walking Home. He's going to be speaking on August 24th. Ken has asked me to, you know, say, what is it in my book that relates to Amherstburg? And I think a lot. I'm going to give him that feedback. We also do our second tactical urbanism test on Play Amherstburg on August 29th. We'll be measuring that as well. Interesting enough, we got some feedback and we're adding more acts to it. And then I'm working on other speakers to keep up the education and inspiration. I would also like to Thrive members that are on the board. We are looking for volunteers to join our white paper teams. And if you want in one of our 9 initiatives, if you're interested, please send us a message and we'll hook you up with 1 or 2, and we welcome your impact. So all of this, you know, what Thrive is trying to do, we have a very nice town here. We have a very good town. It's our belief with placemaking activities like Jim walked us through tonight, this can be an even better Amherstburg. So on that note, Jim, thank you very much. And thank you for everyone that watched tonight. Again, thanks for council. You know, you'll see some of these ideas manifest themselves in the white papers that we bring to you as you work on your 2022 budget. So with that note, we'll be signing off. And again, thank you. And we hope to see you on the Ken Greenberg Zoom on August 24th. Good night, everyone.
Have a good evening.
Thank you. Good night.